Mask of a Diva, a Stan Kraychik mystery, Book 4, 1994. Author, Grant Michaels. Publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York. Author, Eric Aust. For all the divas, operatic and otherwise. Chapter 8. With my newfound freedom, I went upstairs to watch rehearsal. As Daphne had said earlier, it was the first time all the principal singers would be together, and I certainly wanted to witness that. Rather than go backstage, though, I decided to watch from our front in the opera house itself. I found one of the doors that led into the house near the pit, along the left aisle wall. When I opened the door, I met a pleasant rush of cool air from the auditorium. Along with it came the sounds of a piano. Though not so pleasant, someone was attempting a difficult passage from the opera, but fumbling it every time. The piano player would stop and try again and again, pounding at the keys mercilessly and stupidly, trying to vanquish the technical snag with the subtlety of a bulldozer. Well, I used to play the piano, and I was pretty good too. In fact, I won the prize for serious music at my high school talent show all 4 years. I hardly play now, but one thing I still know is that music and piano keys will always resist brute force. You can't just knock down a musical hurdle. You have to coax it and cannot entice it, ply it with analysis and respect and even affection, both for the instrument and for what the composer wrote. And for your own physical equipment, too. All that loving attention usually entices the problem to yield its secret willingly. The house lights were off, but the work lights on stage were bright. The air all around bore the smell of new lumber and fresh paint, and recently laid carpeting. A shiny brass railing separated the orchestra pit from the first row of audience seats, and velvet draperies, the color of fresh-drawn blood, hung from the railing. Those yards of dense, luxuriant fabric would stifle most of the light and movement within the pit, but the sounds of music would still fly by gloriously free from the audience. The stage was devoid of scenery except for a few chairs and a background of artificial rock. The stage crew was bustling about, with clipboards referring to them with clinical precision and then marking the floor with strips of masking tape. Through it all, the pianist persists with the same passage, obtusely making the same mistake over and over, treating the piano like a key punch machine instead of an instrument of music. Finally, someone called out, "Can it, will you?" "Amen, doll." The musical torture stopped for a minute, then resumed with new vigor. The piano itself was downstage, right on the very precipice of the orchestra pit, which put the pianist just out of my sightline. I shuffled quietly along my row toward the aisle of the other end. I wanted to see who'd had the lobotomy at the keyboard. It turned out to be Rick Jansen. Why didn't he stick to things he was better at? Things like driving and buggery. At least one hoped he was better at those. Instead, there he was, lost in the labyrinth created by his own fingers. The piano lamp cast odd shadows on his angular young face, giving it a stark and sinister look. His eyes appeared to vanish into deep sockets under his brow, and his usual too eager smile resembled a demonic leer. A door at the back of the house flew open, letting in a stream of light. Rick and I both looked back toward the open door. Madame Ostinata called out from the back of the house, "Rick, darling, you are here." So it was darling now. Madame rushed down the left aisle. As she passed me, she glanced my way from the corner of her eye. She approached the orchestra pit, then leaned on the rail and stretched herself up toward the stage. "You saved me last night," she exclaimed to Rick, darling, then blew him a kiss. "I owe you my life." Through my nausea, I wondered again how they knew each other, and how was Madame's English improving so fast. Moments later, Sir Jonathan Byers entered through the same doorway and rushed down the same aisle. He was accompanied by Adam Pearce. Rick watched Jonathan Byers hopefully, as if he expected the same bountiful and impassioned greeting from his bugger buddy, Daddy, as he just got from Madame Ostinata. But Byers was so preoccupied with Adam Pearce that he didn't even acknowledge his discarded, previously driven model. "Let's get to work," bellowed Jonathan Byers. Act 2, Scene 3, Renato's entrance, heading into Odi 2. Places now. We have work to do. The soloist converged quickly on stage. I recognized the same handsome Asian man I'd seen at Daphne's reception the night before. I assumed he was the baritone who would be singing the role of Renato. Madame Ostinata would sing Amelia, of course, who was Renato's wife in the opera. Standing in the wings was Mathilda, always close by in case her mistress needed her. The maestro was sitting at a chair close to the piano, as also present on stage and seated at the front edge were the festival's prompter and the resident language coach. Sir Jonathan took a seat in the audience just in front of the production table that had been set up midway in the house. At the table were seated Rhonda Luca, alongside the production's technical director, then the lighting designer and his assistant, and finally a gerbil-face-like man who was supposed to be Jonathan Byers' assistant director, but who seemed to have no clear function. At least not with Rick Jansen and Adam Pearce vying for Sir John's unofficial attentions. There was a place at the production table for Adam Pearce as well, but instead he sat next to Byers in the audience. When he began giving stage direction, Sir Jonathan spoke with an austere directness that showed little emotion or vulgarity. Quite a change from his usual style of address, at least that's how he started. The first level motivations for this scene are easy, he said. You are the club owner. Byers' voice trailed off as he scanned the stage for a particular face. Then he said with great exasperation, Where's the bleeding tenor? Rhonda Luca answered with the production's table. He's on his way, Byers said. Understudy, please. Please? Jonathan Byers had said please? From the rings, a plump but sturdy young man quickly took his place on stage with the other singers. Byers went on. This is where Ricardo and Amelia are caught together by her husband, Renata, who with his cohorts has been planning a fag bashing. Madame Ostinata said, What is that? Wake up, love, said Byers. Your boyfriend, Ricardo, owns a nightclub that caters to a mixed clientele. Some of the townsfolk don't approve and they want the place closed down. Renato, your husband, is their leader, so he wouldn't be too happy to see you consorting with the enemy. We've changed the plot a bit, love. You did know that, didn't you? But where's the king? Said Madame. There is no king, said Byers, his patience already spent. Ricardo owns a nightclub now. Madame again began babbling incoherently about Ken and Chisa, a dog in a church, and then about poor Verdi until Maestro Toscanelli finally got up from his chair near the piano and went to console her with verbal bromides. It was the modern world. The old traditions were dying. Youth would be served. Then followed a slight disturbance back at the piano where Caroline Boetz was trying to take her place. Excuse me, she said too loudly to Rick Jensen, who was still sitting at the keyboard. I am the rehearsal pianist, and said Caroline. But Ricky thing wouldn't budge. Caroline turned to Jonathan Byers. Why is he here? She demanded, but then her face and neck reddened under the work lights, and she looked suddenly lost, as though she hadn't really meant to speak so sharply. To the big daddy director. Jonathan Byers whirled at Caroline, but it was Madame Ostinata who explained in a heavy accent. Rick Darling plays for all my solos. Caroline Boetz replied shortly. There is no solo now. Madame went on. Non tis nu fare una testa. Don't be upset, my child. You will receive full pay. I don't care about that, said Caroline. She turned her imploring gaze to the maestro. Who decided this, and when? Maestro Toscanelli seemed confused by the suddenness of her questions and was unable to answer. Meanwhile, Marcella Ostinata's eyes glittered wildly. She was enjoying herself. Caroline Boetz stared back without flinching. Then she turned once again to Maestro Toscanelli, who now simply shrugged and shook his head like Pontius Pilate. Jonathan Byers settled the debate quickly. "You," he said, snapping his fingers and pointing to Rick at the keyboard. "The car needs petrol. I'll want a long drive after rehearsal." "I can feel it then," replied Rick, cool as a lime Ricky. "But you're not driving me, love. Now just do as you're told and let the young woman play the piano. There's a good boy." I had a little dog and his name was Fuck. Rick Jensen got up and left the stage in an angry huff. Work on the scene resumed. As I watched the rehearsal, I discovered that Jonathan Byers' directorial method was basically to volley stage directions at the singers, challenging them, or else outright demanding that they do his bidding. "Of course, you can't ask me questions," he'd say encouragingly, but then his standard reply would be, "Just try it my way, love." His goal seemed to be to frustrate and confuse the singers to the point where they could not or would not think anymore. The odd thing was, during those brief lapses when I myself stopped thinking and could almost overlook his abrasive style, though walking on water might have been easier, I did get inklings of the dramatic intent that Jonathan Byers had in mind. At this early stage, though, the moments of truth were like optical illusions, fleeting and ephemeral. You thought you saw something, felt something, but then you didn't. Or did you? And then there'd be a flash of intense clarity that caused a very real shiver of delight and even fear. If the noxious Sir Jonathan could get these folks to enact those aberrant visions of his, which seemed to lurk just under the surface of the story, much the way an alternate world exists on the reflective undersurface of water, separated from the top side by a transparent film, just a molecule thin, then the audience at the New England Summer Opera Festival was in for the kind of wild ride the world hadn't seen since the Messrs. Stravinsky and Diaghilev presented their scandalous collaboration in 1913, The Rite of Spring. But who would arrive at that moment and shatter a dream in the making but Bruce David, the tenor? He wore sunglasses and a fedora, and his throat was wrapped with a white silk scarf. "Here I am," he said in a barely audible Mazzavoki, which was further obscured by his noisy sucking of a pastille. "I am ready to sing now. Where are we?" "You just sit and watch," ordered Byers. "But I'm perfectly warmed up." "We're working without you at the moment," snapped Byers. "But this is my opera," said Bruce David, expelling the pastille and revealing his version of a full voice. "Yours," said Byers. "I demand to sing, or I will consult the union." Rondaluca's voice came from the production table. "You're not in the union." "Oh, bleeding Christ," muttered Jonathan Byers. Meanwhile, Daphne, who had arrived with Bruce, slipped into the seat beside me in the darkened audience. "Did you sneak away from work, you naughty boy?" "No, ma'am. The boss called in sick today and had the wigs locked up, so I figured I'd come up here and watch." "Isn't it exciting?" she said. "Has Huang Yo-cho sung yet? He's our Renato." "No one has sung yet," I replied. "They've been working out the blocking. The piano has been playing, but so far everyone has just been humming their part." "They're saving their voices," said Daphne. "Just wait until you hear Huang. A voice like burnished teak. We were so lucky to get him. He's in demand all over Europe." Meanwhile, Jonathan Byers had stopped the rehearsal and was painstakingly reiterating for Bruce David every gesture that he'd just shown to his understudy in the previous hour. Madame Rastinata stood by impatiently, although she could certainly have used the extra rehearsal time. Only Huang Young-chu seemed to relish the chance to rehearse his acting movements once again. At one point, I saw him make a furtive little wave to someone off stage. I looked in that direction and saw April Kelkis standing in the wings, smiling at him with the unmistakable look of love. Finally, it was time to try a run-through of the whole scene with voices and music. Jonathan Byers moved to a chair at the production table. Adam Pierce joined him there. The maestro sat near the onstage piano and conducted Carolyn Bowitz, who followed his direction perfectly, but Madame Ostinata, who was to open the scene with the exclamation, "Ahem!" missed her cue 3 times, once for pitch and twice for timing. Bruce David sang every note Sokovoki and acted out none of the blocking as he'd been shown. It seemed that only Hwang Young Cho had prepared his music thoroughly before rehearsal and had also absorbed Jonathan Byers' stage directions during the preceding hour. 1 professional singer out of 3 wasn't bad. Then the crucial moment arrived. Madame Ostinata had to begin the trio Ode 2. Both the maestro and Carolyn Bowitz tried repeatedly to help her with the attack on the quick, tight upbeat that starts the trio. The 2 notes are sung without accompaniment. It's a difficult cue because those 2 little notes set the tempo for the entire trio that follows, but Madame Ostinata botched it again and again. Finally, in frustration, she turned to the maestro and said, "That girl is confusing me." She glared at Carolyn, then pleaded desperately with the maestro. "Angelo, cara Angelo, ti imploro. I need Rick." Once again, Maestro Toscanelli cooed and coddled Madame Ostinata for many minutes, and once again managed to placate her without yielding to her request. The trio finally got off to a stumbling start, but by that time Jonathan Byers had just about lost interest in the rehearsal and was finding more reward in the attention of Adam Pierce. Through sheer willpower, Maestro Toscanelli and Carolyn Bowitz kept the trio going, which was a major feat since Madama would bring the music to a grinding halt by sustaining every one of the high notes. To keep the tempo up, the maestro began pounding on the top of the piano, which only caused a look of wide-eyed panic on Madama's face. Bruce David was completely inaudible, and though Hwang Young Cho sang beautifully, Daphne's image of smooth-oiled, deeply grained wood had been accurate. The whole scene came off unbalanced and a shambles. Then it was over. Madame Ostinata spoke in a loud voice to Carolyn Bowitz. "Young girl, you should perhaps give up music and find a husband who will buy you a nice dress." Carolyn Bowitz was speechless, as was the maestro. Daphne murmured beside me, "Oh dear." Jonathan Byers was so busy whispering and flirting with Adam Pierce that he completely missed Madama's insult. But up from the production table sprang Rhonda Luca to the rescue. "Hey, you," she said to Madama, as she made her way down toward the stage. "That's my stage. You don't talk like that to anyone while you're up there. I don't care who you are." Rhonda quickly ascended to the stage and escorted Carolyn Bowitz away from the piano and off stage. The maestro and all the other musicians, all except for Madame Ostinata, dispersed backstage as well. There was an aura of revulsion over what had just transpired on stage, both musically and socially. Oblivious to all, though, Jonathan Byers and Adam Pierce were still whispering to each other with great animation at the production table. It was embarrassing to watch them. Then Adam said aloud, "I'll show you what I mean, John." He got up, walked down front, and made his way to center stage, then beckoned Madame Ostinata to join him there. He said to her, "We're considering a new light cue for your aria, Ma Dolorendo. Can you stand here?" He pointed to the spot, and Madama complied. "Special lights for me," she said coyly. Adam ignored her and spoke excitedly out toward Jonathan Byers. "It really will work, John. She'll be singing about guilt and fear and the forces of evil, but we'll bathe her in pink light to show what's really on her mind." Jonathan Byers left the production table and headed toward the stage, too, as if being closer to Adam Pierce would help him understand the proposed lighting change. Then again, Byers might have wanted to consider the whole ideal away from the lighting designer, who was still at the production table and who was clearly irked to see his own theatrical vision being challenged by the stage director's latest darling. Once on stage, Byers said discreetly, "I think it may be a bit much, Adam." "No," replied the other man. You'll see. If you get her down on the ground, the message will be clear. Madama looked horrified. I do not sing on the floor. But Jonathan Byers was seriously pondering Adam Pearce's proposal. Perhaps the message will be a bit too clear, he said to Adam. Then I felt Daphne's hand grip onto my arm. I looked up and saw a scrim the width of the entire stage dropping down from the flies. Stupefied and entranced, we watched it plummet toward the stage floor like a surprise special effect. Not a single voice called out to the people on stage, not even mine. Then I saw the heavy pipe that carried the scrim strike Adam Pearce on the head. He fell to the stage floor, and some of the crew came running away from the wings to help him. Jonathan Byers stood motionless with disbelief. Madama Ostinata was trapped on the other side of the scrim, looking ridiculous and wailing, Circurcio Maleficio! Within moments, I was up on the stage myself. Adam Pearce was still down, but he seemed to be talking jovially to the people who had gathered around him. A few of them had hunkered down and were asking how he was. He said he wasn't hurt at all, just stunned, and there appeared to be no blood on his head, but when Adam tried to lift his arm, nothing happened. His face grimaced in panic. Then, to everyone's horror, his body began twitching violently like a rabbit whose neck had just been broken. His eyes rolled upward and his limbs shook erratically. Rhonda Luca knelt down quickly and rolled him onto his side to lessen the pressure. Someone ran to call an ambulance. Everyone else in the cast and crew had formed a wide circle around Adam and Rhonda, who now resembled a grotesque pieta. The stage became suddenly silent. Adam's long limbs jerked and shuddered, then his body contracted into an acute spasm. He gasped, his breath rattled. Then he died in Rhonda Luca's arms. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.